Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy Hoffman. I am the Director of Climate Justice and Impact at Groundwork USA. We're an affiliated network of 21 place-based, people-centered environmental justice nonprofits across the country. And I had the honor of being the chapter lead for the 5th National Climate Assessments Southeast chapter. We spent the last few years, almost 4 years, working on creating a chapter that we feel represents a wide variety of interests and concerns about climate change in the Southeast, really focusing our time on centering the history of place and how that influences present day inequities in health, climate, economic, and other sorts of indicators in the Southeast, and how that prepares us or doesn't prepare us for the threats of a changing climate into the future. If you have a chance to read our chapter on the internet, it has now been fully translated into Spanish for the first time ever. The National Climate Assessment has been translated fully into Spanish. So please check out nca2023.globalchange.gov. Be sure to read our chapter, but also spend time investigating other chapters. As you see, there are both regional as well as topic level chapters where we focus on either place or we focus on a topic. And we have new chapters, including social systems and justice, as well as the economics chapter, which provides some really important perspective on those two topics that have not been in previous NCAs. If you would like to get involved in NCA 6, the US GCRP, the Global Change Research Program, has just released solicitations for technical inputs or things that the chapter author team for NCA 6 will use to assess the threats of climate change since NCA 5. As well as author nominations. As the chapter lead for the Southeast from the 5th National Climate Assessment, I can tell you that we look at hundreds of potential candidates for making up our author team. And the more people we have at our ability to build our teams, the more representative of the challenges and diverse perspectives about climate change and climate threats in the Southeast our author teams can be. So I encourage you to visit the USGCRP website and nominate yourself or others for inclusion in the NCA 6 process. Now, I'm going to switch gears to sharing a little bit about what the chapter says before handing it off to my colleague, Pam Knox, who will lead us through the findings of KM4, or Key Message 4. Pam, would you please move to the next slide? Thank you. The Southeast chapter is made up of 4 key messages, as well as an introduction. If you go and read the introduction, you'll see just how important it was for us to center the history of this region, the very complicated and very, in some ways, damaging and hazardous history of the region in informing present-day inequities and climate risk. And then we disaggregate that conversation at that kind of regional level into 4 main messages. One focuses on regional growth, how many people are moving to the Southeast, and how that augments shifting climate risks across our both urban, suburban, and rural contexts. Our second KM focused entirely on the interactions between climate change and health in the Southeast. Southeast has the lowest life expectancy of any of the regions in the US. There are reasons why that is in the historical context, and reasons why we need to better protect our health into the future as climate continues to change. Our third key message was all about the economic damage and jobs, households, and security that is threatened by changing climate conditions, and has focused largely on infrastructure and things like that. I encourage you to go and explore these other key messages, as well as learning from probably the most informative author in agricultural context that I've ever gotten a chance to work with, my colleague Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who's going to be looking through and leading us through the findings of Key Message 4, which is all about agriculture. Pam, please take it over from here.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for that good introduction. I'm going to start out. I will tell you this is going to be a very short introduction. We had very strict word count restrictions on our agriculture, and as well as the whole chapter and really the whole report. So there's a lot packed into there, and I encourage you to read it as well as learn from the webinar today. And then maybe you even want to go back and watch the webinar again later, or at least the other ones. So what we're going to be talking about here is the basic messages in this key message, which is all about agriculture. And it's not only about challenges that agriculture will have in the future, but also things that agriculture can be doing to mitigate current climate change and also to adapt to the changing climate as well. Some of the things that we talk about, first of all, are changes in temperature, drought frequency, extreme rainfall, and sea levels. They're already threatening the Southeast agriculture and other food-related systems like aquaculture. And so all of those things are factoring into producers' current decisions about how they're managing their farms um, and their other programs. And they're also something that they're looking forward to in the future because they're going to have to deal with those in the future as well. And so the amount that they are affected by the climate changes kind of depends on what they're growing. If you're growing something that's just a yearly crop, obviously they're responding to the yearly variability in climate as much as they are the long-term climate changes. But there are things that they need to worry about, like infrastructure. Where are they going to store those crops? You know, if they have livestock, then how are they going to maintain the health of their herd? If they have trees, can they plant a tree now that's still going to be healthy and thrive in a climate that's 30 years down the road? So all of those things are things that are looking at. The climate-related hazards are expected to worsen with every increment of global warming. Obviously, we don't know where we're going to end up yet because people are responding to the challenge of climate change, and they're starting to take actions that will reduce that future warming. And we hope that that will be a continuing um, issue that people will work on. But one of the things we do know is that those hazards in a very large way affect farmers and small scale operations, as well as the big commercial farm producers. And so all of those are going to increase competition between urban and rural communities because there's demands for things like water that will be important in the future, as well as land. You know, one of the things that's an issue now is how land is being used and if it's being used best for agriculture or for solar farms, or if it's better used for housing. And so that is all something that's a competition that we're going to have to deal with in the future. Um, we do know that there are a lot of innovative agricultural techniques, such as precision farming, where you're putting on very specific amounts of water that are determined by smart irrigation, and by a lot of it is artificial intelligence driven knowledge about how the crops grow and what the water needs are, so that they can put on exactly what they need and not waste water, because not only does that waste the water, but it also wastes the energy that it takes to pump that water. So those agricultural techniques will show will help us to adapt to the future climate change, as well as improve economics for producers now. We had a couple of figures in this part of the chapter in Key Message 4. They're very complicated because they're sort of bi-directional. So you might have to go back and look at these again. This one shows the concurrence of droughts and black farmers in the Southeast. And you can see generally the key is down on the bottom there. The very dark square means there's a high percentage of farms that are owned by black farmers, as well as a high number of droughts. Generally, the darker colors will show the higher percentage of either total farms or drought events. You can see if you look at the Southeast, there's a real band that follows a lot of the coastal plain. That's an area that's pretty sandy, so it's more likely to see water stress because the water doesn't stick around for long. Those are also areas where a higher proportion of the farmers are minority farmers, including black farmers. And so those are areas that are very vulnerable to increases in drought that we expect to see in the future. And that extends really throughout all of the Southeast. You can see here the Southeast encompasses everything from Virginia all the way over to Louisiana and Arkansas. And that band is really where the key stress is lying there, because those are farmers that don't have a lot of resources in many cases, and also are just really unduly affected by these frequent droughts. Since I moved to Georgia in 2001, we've had droughts almost every 3 or 4 years. Some of them have been multi-year droughts, and the last couple have been shorter droughts. Sooner or later, we're going to hit another big one again, but that will be something that will challenge a lot of farmers, from the smallest to the largest farmers. But the larger farmers have more access to finances that they can use to help protect their farming, whereas smaller farmers don't have as much available for infrastructure or financing. So if we look at this a little bit more, you can see that the more rural areas of the Southeast, especially I know in Georgia, South Georgia is depopulating. A lot of people are moving away from the coast. They're moving into bigger cities like Atlanta. And the people that are left in the rural areas often have the fewest resources, and many are smaller scale, where they can't really afford $100,000 irrigation system. And so those are areas that are really going to be vulnerable in the future. And we also note that the Southeast does have the highest proportion of Black producers uh, compared to the other NCA 5 regions. Very historical rural communities with a lot of farming, a lot of different crops that are produced here. And so I know in Georgia, it's the biggest driver of the economy in the state. And so it's very critical for many of these states in the Southeast in terms of being able to supply not only their own citizens with food and fiber, but also exporting it to other parts of the country and the world. Some of the implications of all these changes for the Southeast, we really see that there's a lot of disproportionate impacts on these under-resourced communities. It's not just the individual farmers, because they will have trouble getting things like irrigation, broadband access, and so on. But there's also the fact that if you can't bring in taxes, you're also underfunding the communities as a whole. So you don't have a very good tax base. If there's not much income coming in, there's not much tax base. That will affect the schools, that will affect police and fire services and other services as well. And so that is a sort of a double whammy for the under-resourced communities in the Southeast. There's competition for resources. We know that along the edges of the cities, there's a lot of demand for land. People are taking farmland out of production and turning it into subdivisions. So that is something that makes land more expensive, either if you're buying it or if you're renting, because many of the farmers do not own the land, but they rent. And so as there's more demand, the prices for that go up, and that makes farming more expensive. There's also regional dependencies. Like climate impacts in other parts of the world can affect transportation of products, food supplies, and so on. For example, if we're shipping grain and cotton out to other parts of the world, then we have to be able to make sure that the ports are working, that sea level hasn't affected access to the ports. Transportation up the Mississippi River, for example, is another thing, or down the Mississippi River. And if there's other adverse climate effects in other parts of the world, that can affect access to seed, can affect access to fertilizer and other essential requirements of farming. And so all of those things will affect farming here in the Southeast. Here's another figure from the chapter. This shows the projected changes in agricultural yields under the high scenario, RCP 8.5, which I think most people think now we probably will not get to that point, because we have been doing adaptation in trying to work against unmitigated just growth of greenhouse gases. But this is what it could look like in probably the worst case. And you can see that most of the region does show that the agricultural yield is likely to go down. That could be from a combination of temperature and changes in rainfall. Not all areas will see less rainfall. In fact, the water cycle is expected to increase because of that temperature. But that also means that there's more evaporation, and so the water balance may get worse for a lot of those areas. You also see that there's some areas where they expect to see an increase in agricultural yield. And that is due to being away from the coast in many cases, because they're not as concerned there about the impact of hurricanes and tropical storms. They will continue to see good rainfall and could even see some increases in rainfall. And a lot of the far southeast is already adapted to pretty warm temperatures. And so it's a little easier for them to deal with it than places farther to the north where they haven't had to deal with the really high temperatures that we've been living with for generations. So some of the things that we see, if we don't have adaptation, the yields are going to decrease in many parts of the southeast, but not everywhere. Precision agriculture will minimize water use if we use just the right amount when we need it, for example, when corn is pollinating. And so that will help from an economic sense because it will reduce not only the amount of water, but it will also reduce the pumping that's required to do that and the irrigation equipment that you need to run that. Cover crops are another adaptation method that people are really looking at. Preserve soil moisture and nutrients, and it decreases erosion. So that's certainly one of the things that we think people are really starting to adapt now. There's still some issues with it. I think a lot of it is just people not really understanding how to manage those. But as time goes on, we certainly hope that there'll be more training in that. And then silvopasture, which is growing livestock in between tree patches or between patches of other agriculture. Other kind of crops will also be something that I think people will look at. Anytime you can mix the things that you're growing, you're going to improve your ability to withstand risk because you'll have more than one source of income. And so that's something that I think people are looking at as well. And in addition, there's also new crops that are coming in like olives and satsuma, which is a kind of tangerine. It's a cold hardy citrus that's growing now in parts of the southeast. Those will take advantage of new markets and it will take advantage of the shifting plant hardiness zones that are related to this warming temperature. So that's something that we're going to see as well in the future. And we also did want to mention that in our key message number 4, we do have a separate box there talking about indigenous stewardship of southeastern ecosystems, and specifically about river cane, which is, you can see a picture of it there. River cane is something that's used by indigenous communities to make baskets and for other purposes. And that is something that we also wanted to look at because those people are going to be highly affected by the climate changes. Some of the things that we're going to see, the native peoples actively managed or tended those cane breaks in the past through consistent thinning. So they provided habitat and they required stems for cultural uses. But a lot of that stuff was taken away by European agriculture. And so we're really trying to find a way for that community to be able to continue to have access to this river cane species. And it provides a lot of ecosystem benefits because it will help with soil and water quality improvements, and the river and stream banks will be stabilized as well, which is important if we have more rain and stream levels are higher, or at least they're more flashy because we get rain in more heavy amounts. So at that point, that's my introduction. If you want more information, of course, you're welcome to go look at our chapter. And I want to spend the rest of the time today talking to our panelists. And I'm going to do this in the way of a format. I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves, and then I'll ask them an initial question for them to answer. And then we'll move on to the next panelist. And then after that, we'll just sort of bounce back and forth between prepared questions and any questions that the audience might want to participate and put in the chat. Don't know if we'll have time to get through everything. We just have an hour in all. So let's go ahead and start. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can see the panelists' faces. And so I'm going to start by introducing our first panelist, Dr. Biswanath Dari. And Dari, go ahead and introduce yourself. And then if you could just tell us a little bit about the NC statewide program on climate smart agriculture and how they might be able to be used in other areas.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Pam, you did a very good introduction. I think you covered a lot of important topic. Hello, everybody. I'm Biswanath Dari. I am an assistant professor and natural resource specialist with cooperative extension at North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University. I'm here with NCNT since last 3 years, working in any space related to natural resources. That means wearing many hats. That could start from simple land management, land preservation, soil health, soil management, soil fertility, anything to do with your best farming management practices to improve your natural resources and giving the maximum profitability to the farmer. I work in the space of climate resilient or climate smart farming practices, which include no tillage, cover crop, use of organic resources, which will improve your soil health. I also work in the space of what are the alternative crop avenue resources in the space of climate change. That's a little bit of me, and I think I will cover a little bit of my research area when I try to answer or discuss about the question. So the first question, Pam, you have, what are the statewide efforts happening in the states of North Carolina in a focus with the Southeast? Yes, I think we are in a very good time, and I'm glad that we are doing all this webinar thanks to NC5, this webinar series, because now is the time when the funding agencies, the higher administrator or the government agencies are giving a lot of funding to help farming community, the farm gate level, where we can get those resources and help build, adapt, or become more resilient in our farming practices. As for example, recently funded by USDA NRCS Climate Smart Commodity Partnership Program, which I am part of it. So NCNT is part of 3 such project, which was funded from USDA NRCS, around $3.1 billion total funding, which was 70 and 70 total 140 project are funded nationwide. The number one, the first 70 project was funded around 2.8 billion, and then another 70 project was funded around 325 million. The project at the states of North Carolina involved, as per my knowledge, is one where I am part of through cooperative extension at NCNT as the largest 1890s College of Agriculture school, serving a small scale limited resource underserved farmer, is a Rodel Institute Climate Smart Grant worth $25 million, where we are helping Southern Piedmont diverse vegetable farmer, starting from all the from Virginia to all the way to the Georgia. There are 5 or 6 rural states in this project. We are providing approximately $6 million both cash and non-cash incentives to the diverse vegetable grower to adapt those climate smart practices, which is no tillage and cover crop, into this southern region of the United States. Then NCNT is also part of another project, which is United States Cotton Farm Trust, which is a cotton incorporated thing. They also got a good amount of funding, approximately 90 million, where farmers, specifically from small scale underserved farmer, are involved. There are approximately 1,000 farmers will be involved in that project too. Then another project we are also involved with, Working Landscape. They are diverse food farming, kind of food hub, creating with silvopasture, animal productions, any kind of row crop or the vegetable crop production. We are not part of, but there are a project happening in the state level, North Carolina, or in the Southeast is Accelerating Appalachia. They are recruiting a lot of farmers, giving incentives to grow climate smart commodities, and getting incentives and making some steps towards soil carbon sequestration increase and reducing the greenhouse gas emission. Those are only few examples where the farmers or the stakeholder or the researcher or scientists are involved in the states of North Carolina level to start with. And I will be respectful of the time, Pam. I can go on and go on and go, but I will possibly give time to my other colleagues.
I guess I should unmute here. It does sound like you're already doing a lot of things across the Southeast and not just in North Carolina. How are you going to provide the results of those studies as
Yes.
sort of education to farmers?
Yes, in fact, we are very strong and we are ahead in the game. Our project director is doing a great job pulling up such a great team. In fact, our first field day, and it's not announced, this is the first time possible I'm speaking in public other than our project partner. We are doing our first farmer-focused field day here at NCNT University Pavilion happening on July 9th. So we are having many different sections of it. We are doing a farmer's field day, which is farmer-focused. All the participating farmer or other farmer coming to each institution's hosting institution and learning, sharing experiences. We do have train the trainer thing, which is also happening on June 9th here at NCNT. We are kind of hub doing that. So lots of stakeholder, NRCS people, USDA people, project partner, the 16 or 17 project partner and the participating farmer involved in there. We already started collecting data. We are having quarterly report. This is like a first time in the history USDA is like really need all this robust quarterly report creating. We have a modeler in our team, which is also in the audience, Comet model, which will be incorporating all the soil health data, farming practices data, and create a robust model specifically for the Southeast. So these projects are very, very focused and give a lot of data depository upon finishing on this project, and that will be really useful for the USDA and RCS down the line.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let's turn now to our second panelist, Michael Carter Jr. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him yet, so I'm interested to hear what he does and a little bit about land justice and the importance of that for the Southeast. So go ahead, Michael. You're muted. You need to unmute.
I knew that. I was just testing you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Carter Jr. With Carter Farms and Africulture. Africulture is a nonprofit that focuses on the principles, practices, plants, and people of African descent that's contributed to agriculture worldwide. And we work a lot with farmers. We're a century farm. I'm a fifth generation farmer. And one of the things that we do is teach Africulture to students at University of Virginia and other universities. And we work on various grants related to climate smart initiatives. Presently, we're working with American Climate Partners to create measuring tools around how to capture soil carbon, deep soil carbon in the soil to measure some of the climate smart practices. To me, this is a very critical area that needs to combine a lot of different industries. We have a habit of kind of siloing these situations, but the climate crisis that's approaching affects us all. It includes all industries. Our consumerism, our consumption, our production of all things, whether it be cars, trucks, SUVs, as well as food, as well as livestock and cattle. We work with farmers closely, usually one-on-one, and with various conferences and field days to help farmers understand the importance of it, to practice it, and really to get a greater understanding of the ideals. One of the things that we have trouble with in the U.S. and especially in the Southeast is we have a monocrop of farmers. And when I say a monocrop of farmers, mostly white males. And a monocrop of anything usually does the environment very poorly. But we've got ourselves into this situation because it's been a monocrop. It's been focused much more on seven figures in 7 generations. So listening to your presentation, there was always a idea of how much money you can make, how much profit you can make with the practices. And even as we work with these, with the government and other private organizations, we pretty much have to bribe/incentivize farmers to even take on these practices. That we've lost the idea of making sure that we need to prepare for 7 generations, that we make sure our children, our grandchildren, our great-grands, and so forth and so on are taken care of. And we moved away from those indigenous thoughts, and Africulture is working to reinstill those thoughts back into our forefront, not into our psyche.
Do you think the farmers that you work with have access to the tools that they need to be able to do things like measure soil fertility? And if not, what could be done to help them get access to that?
I think even that approach of trying to measure soil fertility with tools, to me, you measure soil fertility with diversity. So the more diverse cropland that you have, you're going to have a much more fertile soil that would only require maybe a microscope to really measure various soil diversity and a very a complex soil test that goes beyond NPK. that really measures the microorganisms in the soil. One of the things that we are doing and researching at Carter Farms with Africulture is growing for your ethnic type. The idea that if you grow more crops that are in your ethnic type and from the area that you come from, it's going to be better for the soil and better for the human body in terms of when you consume it. And the more diverse crops that you grow, we grow a lot of African crops on our farm, and these crops do extremely well in our soils with just rain, and no matter when the rain comes. As we talk about smart irrigation, the reality is the best smart irrigation is rain-fed irrigation whenever it comes. Because if you're having to pull resources from wherever to put on your fields to try to have the plant roots suck it up in a timely manner, sometimes you're right, many times you're wrong. And the crops we grow end up being, you know, our sorghum or our Nigerian spinach or our taro, regardless of if it's a 2-week drought, a 2-month drought, they still do extremely well with very little insect pressures and extremely high and vigorous growth. So I think moving away from the idea of measuring these things, you know, we measure through diversity. And the more diverse your fields are, the more fertile your land will be.
Well, and I think that certainly reduces risk, because if you have multiple crops, then even if you have problems with one, you're more likely to see other ones thrive and do well. Do they usually keep that food, those crops for themselves, or they sell it in local markets, or do they export it in other ways?
We've been working with University of Virginia and Aramark and other universities to assist our farmers in getting the best price possible and selling to them, to those institutions. We find when you try to go through markets and things like that, farmers markets, et cetera, the competition is extremely high. So you're talking about like in July, everybody comes to the farmers markets with tomatoes, just based upon my microeconomics class at North Carolina A&T many years ago. Supply and demand says if there's a high supply, demand is low and price is low.
Yep.
So we really focus on creating better markets that provide retail pricing at wholesale quantities for our Black farmers and minority farmers. And thus far it's been successful at University of Virginia. We're going to roll it out at VCU and William & Mary and hopefully Old Dominion this coming fall. And it benefits everybody. So the markets are critical because unfortunately the market for fresh produce is limited. And unfortunately as well, our perception about fresh produce and farms, how much we pay for our produce is very low.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much. And maybe we'll be able to explore that a little bit more later. I want to turn now to our third panelist today, Dr. Julie Shortridge. And Julie, if you'd go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell us about how you see farmers and other producers as using climate information, and do they have access to what they need?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Pam. So I'm in biological systems engineering at Virginia Tech, and then I also am a specialist with Virginia Cooperative Extension. And in this role, I do research and extension related to various topics at the kind of the intersection of climate, water supply, and agriculture. And so a lot of my work focuses on irrigation and water supply planning. So that can include helping growers irrigate more effectively, but also understanding the broader implications of irrigation on things like statewide water supply. And then I've also been doing some work on the impacts of climate change and extreme weather on agriculture more generally, whether irrigated or rain-fed, mostly focusing on row cropping and vegetable cropping systems and trying to identify strategies to help address these impacts. And to your question about how is climate change or weather informing infrastructure planning on farms? I guess I can only speak to one piece of that, because as others have touched on, agriculture in the region is tremendously diverse and can mean a lot of different things. In my role working with irrigators, I can say that in terms of the degree to which I see climate impacting those decisions, to be completely blunt, it's fairly limited. When I talk with growers who have either adopted irrigation or expanded it, usually that conversation centers more around the market conditions and the economic conditions. You'll hear things like, the prices could justify the investment in this past year, or I don't think they justify the investment. Sometimes I think climate has a piece of that decision. In particular, I mean, one thing I'll hear that you've mentioned, Pam, is I'll hear people say we have a drought every year now, and it's short term, but it can be very impactful in terms of production. And so I think that is something that is potentially impacting people's decisions, but it's within the broader realm of all of the complicated things, market, labor issues, all of these other things that growers have to deal with, and climate is really just one piece of that. And I also think it's important to recognize that when I have gotten the impression that climate played a role in that decision making, it is not that farmers are poring over data products that those of us on the research side are doing. It's very much their intuition and their observations of what they see in their fields. And so I think that's one thing that we need to be aware of when we talk about what's the data and the information that growers need. There's certain forms of information that are more digestible and I think more interpretable, and that's not always the form of information that we tend to put things out in.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. It seems to me the things that come out from the modeling community is more often things like average temperature and average precipitation. And we know farmers don't use that information. They want to know, what the degree days are going to be, or they want to know, how many events we're going to have of rain of over 2 inches. So they have to worry about erosion. Do you find when you look at these different agricultural communities that there are differences between, say, the crop growers and livestock growers in how open they are to even talking about climate information and how much they factor that in? I know economics is huge for farmers. If you can't make money, you're not going to be a farmer for long.
Right. Yeah. And I have a colleague who, he starts almost every extension talk that he gives. He's like, if you're still farming these days, you're doing a lot of things right. Because quite frankly, if you don't know what you're doing, you probably would have gone out of business quite some time ago. In terms of the willingness to talk about these issues and recognize them, I can't really speak about differences across growers because I don't personally work with a lot of, say, livestock producers, aquaculture. I mean, we have so many different types of agriculture in our state, and I think the Southeast more broadly. I do think generally there is a huge range. I mean, I think that, you certainly hear skepticism and you hear, kind of avoidance of the topic for reasons that I think are pretty understandable when you think about them more broadly. But I would say it's not the case across the board. I mean, I think that there is an increasing recognition that people can see what's in front of them with their own eyes, and even if there's someone who's skeptical of the human causes of climate change, they can see that rainfall patterns are different. Like I said, we get a drought every year. They can see that they're dealing with salinity damage if they're irrigating from water sources in coastal regions. And so, I think there's still opportunities to have conversations about this that, in messages that I think people can be receptive to.
Yeah. What do you think would be the most useful information for them to have that maybe they don't have now? And this is for the other two panelists. You're welcome to join in on this as well. What information can we provide that would be helpful?
Well, I'll say for, in my view, I think that again, those of us on the research side of things tend to think a lot in terms of information and data products. And I don't think that's the limiting factor right now. I think the products we have are tremendous, right? We have these high resolution, just an amazing amount of data that exists already. I think it's more about the process by which this information is delivered, right? So I think if you want someone using climate or weather information in their planning, it has to be a metric that matters to them, right? So like growing degree days rather than long-term averages. It has to be easily accessible and interpretable. So think about when you pull up the weather forecast on your phone or traffic information, that's what it needs to be. Like, it can't be go to this website and enter a year. It can't be complicated like that. And I think it also needs, and I think that's a place where partnerships become important, right? Because I think there's other, particularly private sector, that's just better suited to like getting information out that way than at least those in academic contexts are. I also think that ideally it's not just pushing data out there. It has to be embedded within a larger, I think, educational program that's talks about how do you make use of this information, because that's not always really apparent. And so I think this is a place where cooperative extension and other educational institutions can be impactful.
Okay. Dari or Michael, want to jump in here?
Yeah, I can chime in. I think my colleague Julie, I think you said it right. Getting the data accessible. I think time has changed, so they just do not look into this long-term precipitation pattern, because we have to look into the short-term weather pattern, because we are talking about a hailstorm in March in North Carolina. So we have to be very focused, region-specific, short-term extreme weather event. And to do that, you have to really follow your normal long-term climate thing as well as a region-specific weather thing. That could be through, like Julie was telling, very easily. So the technology is moving forward, and for any kind of agriculture technology, we are very advanced. There are lots of companies available. So and people are developing a lot of app. And the farmers, still many farmers are sometimes technologically challenged, but we do have farmers, or at least we are in the training phase when we can train the farmer to get accessible of those data. One thing we could do to make it more accessible is having more connections between academia, like a researcher we do, then the private sector, the company, the technology side, and more importantly, we have to have the farmers, the farming community get involved in the process. So what I call is peer learning farming. So if we have one or two farmers, the farming group, or maybe cooperative, like a farmers cooperative involved in the process. Hey, look, I'm a peer level farmer, I'm an expert farmer, I'm doing these things, getting all this data transformed so that I can harvest my crop better way, and I can get my crop defrost in time so that it doesn't get killed in the month of April or March due to the frost, which is a very common thing in states of North Carolina. So if we have such expert farmer be part of that, I think we will make a lot of difference, specifically in the Southeast, where in national base is looking 1.4% farmer, like a Black or a socially disadvantaged farmer, are representing the farming community. So if we can bring all these farmer in the Southeast becoming more advanced or becoming part of this accessible data, then we can change approximately $5 billion of total food at the production side in the farm gate level. So we need to have those people be part of the discussion in the table to have the data access to them, although they're in the rural or urban areas.
All right. Well, Michael, let me follow up with you then. It sounds like a lot of the producers that you work with are more interested in dealing with what's actually occurring than trying to make plans with smart irrigation and so on. So what kind of information would be most useful, or is it something that's handed down from one generation to the next, as in terms of what crops do best? What kind of information would be helpful?
I say beyond information, what would be most helpful is a establishment of trust amongst the two entities, where there can be a bridge between the types of communication that they have. This is what I'm growing. How can this benefit you all as a university and the larger farming community? In many cases, most farmers are somewhat skeptical when we're dealing with researchers, because it's usually a very transactional relationship.
Yep.
And that transactional relationship is usually one-sided.
Yep.
Someone's got 6 figures to do research. They want to give you $250 to do a trial, and it's like, okay, well, it doesn't balance out.
Sure. So how do we build that trust?
Well, you've got to get down to the ground level. You got to, very much like you would any other relationship, you got to get to know them. You got to know them beyond that transaction. We've had various trials of various crops in Virginia. I remember a trial of, I want to say, chickpeas. And a lot of hype around it. A lot of things happened. It didn't turn out that well, and you don't hear from the researchers ever again until the next trial. And that becomes extremely disheartening. That no one wants to feel used or underappreciated. So that transactional relationship needs to start, regardless if you have a grant or not. Having those research points coming out and seeing the farmer, talking to the farmer, emailing the farmer, find out what they're growing. Stop asking, "Can I pick your brain?" That's like somebody going through your pick your own strawberry patch. Can I pick your strawberries for free? It's like,
Right.
it's
I see that's a
kinda-
very one-sided kind of thing where you're not really doing it. Do you find that there's more interaction in, say, extension than there is in some of the other research communities, or not really?
Not for small farmers. Extension is usually geared toward larger row crop farmers, at least in Virginia. With the HBCUs kind of relegated to deal with smaller farmers, and usually the smaller farmers have the most. We have the most of the farmers, small farmers. In Virginia, there's approximately 36,000
Mm-hmm.
small farmers, of
Mhm.
which at VSU you have 12 small farm agents part-time who have to work with 35,000 farmers.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So we have a lot to do in terms of that, and that's the climate change that has to be mostly adjusted. It's not just the environment, but it's the environment within the culture of agriculture that we have to severely adjust to ensure that we can even fight climate change from a plant and soil perspective.
So there was an initiative announced this morning about improving broadband access in rural communities and so on. Is that helpful, or is that just more just feeding of data without necessarily feeding more useful information?
It's helpful if they can get it right. So many times, I mean, and I'm a victim of it because I'm on my 4th or 5th Wi-Fi router or whatever else to try to have service just for this call. So getting that right is tough. It is helpful, but a lot of times it's helpful for our overall life. We don't necessarily need it to communicate with researchers,
Mm-hmm.
but we do need it just to function in the world today. And to make us feel like we actually can, receive an email or get a call or do a voice call, Zoom call with others without being disconnected or sounding like a robot.
Yeah, I guess that does affect the ability to at least communicate and maybe build some bridges just by interacting, even though it may not be that much useful if you're not necessarily using all the model data that's out there.
But it's also, how the society has really shifted away from one-on-one calls and even picking up the telephone and calling.
Yeah.
Like cell phone service is not affected as much by broadband, but very few want to actually call, even talk to farmers. They would much rather text or send an email.
Yep.
So getting that call and then, and usually calling after hours is another thing that helps, because when I'm in the field, last thing I want to do is have a conversation when I'm flowing
If
and
you're
in my
working,
rhythm.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask each of you to think about, what do you think production might look like in the next 25 years or so? How do you think your communities will respond to whatever changes they see are happening, and what kind of things will you see? And some of you work more with commodity groups, others work more with small farmers, so you're going to have different perspectives. And let me start with Dari, and then we'll go to Julie, and then we'll let Michael finish it up. So just a couple of minutes from each of you.
Sure. I think you showed a good map, Pam, in your introduction slide when you kind of showed the overall how the production will look like in few years. So I was also reading a paper like last week when it says USA Environmental Protection Agency, they said that the yield of the major crop, like a commodity crop like corn, soybean, wheat, and rice, they will be severely decreased due to the climate change. As for example, corn will be 24% decreased, and wheat would be like 17% decrease. That is as per the report by NASA. So this is kind of a overall negative impact of climate change. But the good thing is there is more carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere that will actually give a boost to the crop yield too. So there's a kind of a trade-off in situation. But on the other side, the livestock production will be severely decreased because of the drought, extreme heat. They cannot tolerate. So we have to do more integrated farming, having animal in the silvopasture like you showed in your presentation, that can kind of trade up some situation. But the golden thing would be two good things. One, we have to somehow incorporate ag technology, which is, different type of irrigation technique, like a precision agriculture thing, flying the drone and know the very specific farm need-based resources utilization that will actually help to boost your crop yield without wasting a lot of resources. That could be irrigation water, like my colleague Julie is doing, or any kind of farmer who are doing with any fertilizer. So if you do apply your fertilizer fertilizer or irrigations or any kind of weed or pest management in a precise way through precision agriculture, that's a solution. And the last thing I would say in the Southeast, this I think we are blessed to be in the Southeast, diverse specialty crop, like, and I think Michael really nailed it. Just to look, and we are in a very good positions to follow different type of diverse crop and soil system that is very specific to Southeast. So that is a way to go to boost your crop yield in a fresh, region specific, farmers market food. And I will stop here. Yeah.
All right, Julie, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen in the next 25 years?
Well, that's that question makes me nervous. I try to avoid, making predictions. The one that I've told before and that I do feel comfortable making is just as someone who works in the water supply realm, I don't see a scenario where water supply pressures ease in the region. I mean, I think both in terms of physical pressures, even under scenarios in regions that see more rainfall, the higher ET combined with competing demand. I think both in terms of physical pressures as well as the regulatory structures around how it's managed. I don't see a scenario where those become less challenging than they are now. So that's one prediction that I do feel comfortable making. I think more broadly than that, and I wouldn't call this a prediction because I don't want it to happen. But I think if you look at any other large scale global change that has happened to our world over the past few decades, typically those with capital, with access to resources and so forth, can adapt their practices to respond and to potentially even benefit from those big changes. And those that don't have those things are either pushed to the margins or potentially pushed out of farming altogether. And so I think those of us who are in roles where we aim to serve the broader good, whether that's in an academic or a government setting, I think we need to be very thoughtful and intentional about who benefits from our research and our outreach, and how we can make sure that those benefits are flowing to those who need them the most. Because I do think that technology holds a tremendous amount of potential, but you can't ignore the questions about who benefits from it or just assume that everyone will. And I think Michael was spot on when he said that our history of extension, at least in this state, has not been balanced. And so I think those are things that really need to be rectified to avoid some of the more negative outcomes that I think are possible if we're not thoughtful about them.
Okay, that sounds great. And Michael, I will give you the last word here on what you think your community will look like and what do you think they'll be growing in the next 25 years. And maybe also add something about what we can do to make it the best possible future for them. That's a lot to do in 3 minutes.
I'll do my best. In 25 years, I see our diet looking more like it did in 1900 than in 2024. We're going to be eating a lot more quote unquote weeds, aka wild crops that are going to be able to survive the adjustments of a warmer climate with less rain. And ultimately we'll be healthier because we'll be eating things that has adapted to the changes. Unfortunately, our improved crops over the last 50 to 60 years through the Green Revolution and other technologies has got us to this point of now almost shifting our climate to a point of almost being unrecognizable. And unfortunately, we're going to have to be forced to eat our weeds. We're going to have to be forced to grow or to eat from local farmers. We're going to have to be forced to source from a government, from institutions, from farmers within a 200-mile radius of our state, and not get everything from Yuma, Arizona, or Southern California, where 90% of our produce generally comes from for the entire country, which is a good thing. But it shifts our habits. So one of the things I would definitely encourage everyone to do is vote local and vote with your dollar. That's the biggest thing that we can do to support our farmers. In the state of Virginia, we lost roughly 10,000 farmers. Of those, about 200 of those were African-American farmers, which was a 20% decrease or decline. And the reason why we lost them is because we don't support them with our dollars. We don't vote for them with our dollars. when we see them or when their goods are at various places that we can buy them from. So that what I'd be to encourage everybody on the call is to vote with your dollars. This is an election year. Let's vote for our small farmers, wherever you are, your local farmers, wherever you are, whatever state, whatever jurisdiction. But go to the farmers markets, search them out, look on the internet, find them at Virginia Black Farm Directory and other places. It's quite important for us to maintain a local food supply, and the best way to maintain it is to support them via your dollars, your produce folks, and your livestock people.
Do you think that the number of farmers is going to continue to go down? You said there was a decrease. Do you think that's going to continue because of pressure from urbanization and pressure from maybe outside groups?
And that's a 30-minute answer right there. But yes, it's going to continue to decline. There's numerous factors on there. The biggest thing is the perception of farmers and the occupation of farming. We don't have young people, especially African Americans, coming through HBCU saying, I want to go into farming. You see that more at Virginia Tech, where you have a farmer who comes in, takes the class, see how it can apply to their farming operation, takes it back and grows their farm, and then passes it on to the next generation. We have a very troubling or challenging reality of passing it on and helping the next generation see the value of the occupation and the vocation.
Yeah, we have to find ways to make it, an important job for people to do and to be able to make money at it. Because if you can't live on it, then that's really tough. So I appreciate all three of your perspectives on that. And we got about 2 minutes to go, so I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy for a few final thoughts. Thank you all so much for your presentations.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, panelists, so much for sharing your perspectives on our fourth key message, all focused on agriculture. I know I learned a lot about each of your experiences and visions, for what this sector can look like in the Southeast now and into the future. And what I want to just reiterate for everyone that's still on the call is the opportunity to get involved in NCA 6. As we've heard, that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. There are still perspectives that we need to hear from. We need to center in the creation of the next assessment. So please visit the USGCRP website to nominate others or yourself to participate in NCA 6, as well as be sure to visit our YouTube channel where you can watch the other recordings from the other KM webinar series installments. Thanks again to NC State University for being the host for this webinar series. Shout out to Bobby and Kaylin, who have been dutifully coordinating and executing this this webinar series and other parts of our engagement over the past 6-7 months. And thank you to all of you for participating in today's webinar. We thank you so much for supporting the NCA 5 Southeast chapter. It was an absolute dream to be able to be the chapter lead. And please do reach out to us if you need any further guidance on any of our particular things that you heard today, or ways that we can connect you with our author team to answer more of your questions at the granular level. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we will see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.